When did we start just going to church as if it were rituals we had to perform? When did church become boring and cold? When did we stop expecting anything to happen on Sunday morning? Romans chapter 16 is a famous chapter in the Bible. It has received recognition for a couple reasons. First, verse 16 of chapter 16 is a verse that all teenage boys notice. And that is this verse: greet one another with a holy kiss. I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. The other reason Romans chapter 16 is noteworthy is the list of names in the chapter. Paul mentions 35 different people in his farewell. Most of these people are names that are very difficult to pronounce, and because they are difficult to pronounce, and because the chapter is the conclusion of the letter, and on the surface appears to be only personal remarks that don't mean anything to us, we tend to skim over this chapter. However, look closely, and you will see a lot of love in this chapter. Because you see, Paul is not writing to some far-off church of nameless members, but the people that he knew by name, people that he cared about, and people he had a relationship with. The whole book of Romans has been a deep discussion of law and grace and theology and doctrine, subjects we too often box into a cold and sterile room to dissect and debate rather than live and share. Romans chapter 16 demonstrates and puts into practice everything the first 15 chapters were trying to say. In this chapter, we see demonstrated the most important doctrine of all, the doctrine of love. You see, more than a list of names, Romans chapter 16 teaches us what the church is all about. This list teaches us what it means to have fellowship. Romans chapter 16 demonstrates what it means to love one another. Now, before we get to the names in this chapter, let's look again at verse 16. To demonstrate our love for one another by a kiss might seem a little strange to us. However, a kiss was a common form of greeting in those days, and you can still see it practiced in many Mideastern countries. Our culture is more standoffish, and we often feel uncomfortable with such an intimate greeting. And to make it even more uncomfortable for us today, you need to understand that in Bible times, a man would never kiss a woman who was not his wife or his mother. That would be considered immoral. So when Paul says, greet one another with a holy kiss, he's talking to the men, not the women. Now, a handshake or a man hug may be as close as we can get to greeting one another with a holy kiss in church today. A kiss represents closeness, a bond, a very special relationship. It's that kind of familiar and personal fellowship that we need to be striving for at Central Park Christian Church. Most men do not have that kind of relationship with other men. That's why the church is often dysfunctional. Now, to the names in Romans chapter 16. We can break the list down into three groups or three categories. First, there are names we know a lot about. Then there are names we don't know a lot about. And finally, there are names we know nothing about. Now, there's a good chance that I will mispronounce some of these names. And I may even be inconsistent in how I pronounce them. So please bear with me. By looking at these names, let us see what it means to really love one another. So the first group of names are those we know a lot about. There are 8 names in this category, and I call them well known because they're mentioned elsewhere in the New Testament. Follow along as I read Romans chapter 16, verses 3 and 4. Greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. They risked their lives for me. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. This, of course, is the famous husband and wife team we read about in the book of Acts. They had settled in Corinth after the Emperor Claudius passed a law forbidding Jews from living in Rome. Paul met them when he arrived in Corinth. Priscilla and Aquila were tent makers like Paul, and the three of them got along very well. They were known as hard workers in the church. Apparently, after the Emperor Claudius died, the law banning Jews in the capital city was repealed, and so the couple returned to their hometown of Rome. It's interesting that Paul mentions Priscilla first. The custom of the day was to introduce the man first. Some think Priscilla was mentioned first because she was of noble birth and had fallen in love with and married Aquila, a common, everyday Jewish tent maker. But I think it means something else, because when we were first introduced to the couple in Acts chapter 18, Aquila is mentioned first, like it should have been. I think the reason is this. For years, my three brothers lived in my shadow. He said I was the oldest, so in high school, they were always John's little brothers. My brother Dan even found it to be true when he enrolled in Bible college. Old people would say, "You're John's brother." All that changed several years ago. Suddenly, because of the people Dan met on the mission field and the contacts he has here in the States, people now often say to me, "Oh, you're Dan's brother." My younger brother has become better known than me. And maybe Aquila and Priscilla experienced the same role reversal. We don't know how or why, but Priscilla became very well known. Maybe for her teaching, maybe for her hospitality, maybe just for her personality. I wonder, did this bother Aquila? Was his male ego damaged? To be honest with you, when my brother Dan became more well known than me, my ego did suffer a little. But the funny thing is, the same kind of role reversal has now happened with my son. Instead of JD being known as my son, I'm now known as JD's father. And it doesn't bother me now because I'm thrilled that he's making an impact in the kingdom. And I'm happy and proud of his accomplishments. Well, Paul does not tell us how, but somehow Aquila and Priscilla risked their lives for him and for the church. I wonder, can we put aside our egos and instead of demanding recognition, honor, and respect, just serve the Lord, no matter who gets the credit? In verse 13, Paul mentions two more well-known people whose roles have changed in church. He says in verse 13, "Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has become a mother to me too." Rufus was the son of Simon of Cyrene. If you recall from Mark chapter 15, Simon was in Jerusalem when Jesus was crucified, and he was forced to carry the cross of our Lord. In the verse from Romans I just read, you see the role reversal. Apparently, the boys had made a name for themselves in the early church, and they were now better known than their father. Rufus apparently lived in Rome with his mother. Tradition is that at some point, before Rufus and his mother moved to Rome, Paul had stayed with her, and she took care of him. Fellowship can take many forms. And in this case, Rufus' mother was a mother to Paul as well. Over the years, I have had many mothers in church. For instance, when I have had a cold that lingers several days, many have told me to go to the doctor. Usually my church mothers are older ladies, but in recent years, since I'm getting older, they've been younger women too. That's the kind of thing Rufus' mother did to Paul. Can you just hear her? Can you hear her saying, you're not going on another missionary journey until you get some rest? Concern about each other's health is the way fellowship is shown as well. Timothy is mentioned in the first part of Romans chapter 16, verse 21. He says, Timothy, my fellow worker, sends his greetings to you. Now, obviously, Timothy was with Paul when he wrote this letter, and not in Rome, but Timothy is probably the best known of everyone on this list. He was Paul's right-hand man. In Philippians chapter 2, Paul says there's no one like him. 2 books in the New Testament were sent to Timothy, and despite their age difference, Paul trusted Timothy to carry on the work he began. It is hard to have that kind of fellowship. The kind of fellowship that encourages and helps young people. You know, we always tend to say the young people are the church of tomorrow. But if we believe that, we are stifling fellowship and discouraging young people. You see, young people are not the church of tomorrow. They are the church right now. The only question is, will we let them be the church, or will we push them aside so we can do it the way we want it done? Years ago, I was the dean of the junior high at the church camp. Instead of having a preacher or a youth minister or a worship team do the evening worship service, I had the campers do it. And they had to do it all. They had to do it all. No adult was going to be involved in the evening chapel time. It would have been easier and safer to find someone that could preach or sing or lead in some way, but what would that teach the young people? You see, church is not a spectator sport. Now, when those kids led Vespers, it was not like what I would have done. Not at all. It was not a full hour length, and it wasn't real serious, and it wasn't really focused that much either. The Vespers that week did not have great preaching or good singing, but it's funny. At the end of the week, so many of the campers came up to me and said, thank you. We never did that before, and it made the service mean so much to me. Can we trust our young people? We say that's loving one another. We might say we love kids, but do we really? Do we love them enough to let them serve? 4 more names are mentioned in the last part of Romans chapter 16, who, and these people like Timothy, are with Paul, and they send the greetings. He says, as do Lucius, Jason, and Sosipater, my relatives, Gaius, whose hospitality I and the whole church here enjoy, send you his greetings. Now, at first glance, you may wonder, how can I call them well-known Christians? Because maybe you haven't heard them before. But their stories are in the Bible. Lucius was one of the prophets and teachers at Antioch that prayed over Paul and Barnabas and sent them off on their first missionary journey in Acts chapter 13. Jason is found in Acts chapter 17 when a riot broke out in Thessalonica and the mob went to his house to look for Paul and Silas. Sosipater is mentioned in Acts chapter 20 as being one of the men who traveled with Paul while he went on his journey through Greece, and Gaius is mentioned in 1 Corinthians as being one of the few people Paul had baptized while in Corinth. Now, these 4 men showed their love for Paul by supporting him. They prayed for him, they went with him on some of his trips, and Paul stayed in their homes. In Indiana, the motto is, Hoosier hospitality is no accident. In the church, it should not be an accident either. Since at least the 1950s, church growth experts have predicted that small churches will die and either be swallowed up by larger congregations or simply disappear. And although that has happened to some, the small church is still everywhere and refuses to die. Most small churches have problems. They're often dysfunctional. They more than usually need money. And small churches usually mess up in some way. But we survive because we know and care about each other. Remember when your children were born We remember, small churches remember that. Remember when someone's loved one dies? Small church does. We remember the marriages, the new jobs, the sadness and happiness that we all experience. And we all experience it together. See, a church falls apart when we forget that, or when we no longer share our lives together. It thrives and grows when we remember. Well, the next category in Romans chapter 16 are those we know a little about. Romans chapter 16, verse 22. I, Tertius, who wrote down this letter, greet you in the Lord. Tertius was Paul's personal secretary. It was common practice in those days to dictate your letter to a scribe, but more than an employee, Tertius was a valuable and needed helper for Paul. Romans chapter 16, verses 1 and 2 says, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church in Cenchrea. I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints, and to give her any help she may need from you, for she has been a great help to many people, including me. Phoebe not only was from the church in Cenchrea, a port city just outside of Corinth, but she also was the one who was going to deliver this letter to the church in Rome. She doesn't get much press because she does not always fit the mold of our preconceived ideas. You see where it says in our text that she's a servant? The word there actually is a feminine form of the word Paul uses for deacon. She was a deaconess. So was she an officer in the early church? Did the early church have women in positions of authority? Scholars disagree, and you can draw your own conclusion. But here's the point I want to make. Sometimes we get so hung up on titles, positions, and going by the letter of the law that we miss real fellowship. We miss opportunities to love each other. I don't think it really matters if Phoebe was a church officer or that she was a woman. What matters is that she worked hard at church. Can we get beyond titles and positions and surface appearances and just work hard and love one another? Romans chapter 16, verse 7. Greet Andronicus and Junius, my relatives, who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles, and they were in Christ before I was. Now, there's no reason for scholars to think these two were blood kin to Paul, and most scholars believe they were relatives only in the general sense that they were Jewish Christians. He called them relatives in much the same way we sometimes call each other brother and sister. Andronicus and Junius were probably another husband and wife team, who many think were two of the original Christians. But they were baptized at Pentecost. Or maybe they were in the group of 120 who gathered in the upper room before Peter preached that first sermon. You see, for Paul to say they were in Christ before him suggests that maybe he had persecuted them before he became a Christian. Who they were beyond that, we don't know. But in Christ, even if our past has not been the best, we can now love each other and work together. Romans chapter 16, verse 8. Greet Amplias, whom I love in the Lord. In the ancient Greek catacomb, an ancient Christian catacomb, in a cemetery, is a tombstone marked with the name Amplias. It is decorated in such a way that it indicates the person buried there was very important and of high rank. Yet the name was a name almost exclusively given to slaves. Could it be, as William Barclay speculates, that rank and place were so completely wiped out in the early church that it was possible for a man to be a slave in the world but a prince in the church? Social distinctions simply did not exist. There are a lot of people in this category that prove social distinctions did not exist in the early church. Let's look at them briefly. Romans chapter 16, verse 10. Greet those who belong to the household of Aristobulus. Aristobulus was the grandson of Herod the Great. Remember him? He was the king who had all babies killed when Jesus was born. Now, nowhere do we have a record of Aristobulus becoming a Christian. Paul is greeting his household, which would include his slaves and servants. In Roman culture, if you died, your household slaves and servants would go to Caesar, although you would still be known as your dead master's household. Apparently, some of those inherited the great household became Christian. Romans chapter 16 is similar to that. Greet Herodian, my relative. Greet those in the household of Narcissus who are in the Lord. Herodian was another name of a slave. So again, Paul calling him my relative was like saying, my brother. Narcissus was the secretary to the emperor Claudius, a very important official. Romans chapter 16, verse 15. Greet Phileas, Julia, Nereus, and his sister. Again, these are slave names, and it's known that Nereus was the slave of Flavius Clemens and his wife Domitilla. And that's where the list becomes very intriguing, because Flavius and Domitilla were important Roman officials involved in a huge scandal later on, in the year 95 AD. When it was discovered, they were Christians. What made it an even bigger scandal was Flavius' father had been the man under Nero who had overseen the placing of Christians on crosses, covering them in tar and setting them on fire, as well as rounding up Christians who were to be thrown to the lions. Here's my point listing those names. How did the Roman Empire change? It did not change by Paul preaching to Caesar. He never got the chance. But by household slaves, unimportant people, living their faith every day. Demanding our rights will not change our culture. Living peaceful, loving, caring lives will. Well, the final category are those we know nothing about. Scan the rest of the names in this chapter. On a few of them, Paul makes a short comment, but other than that, we know nothing about these people. They are completely lost to history. Now, maybe someday in heaven, we will get to meet them, along with the thousands upon thousands of other faithful but unknown servants of Jesus throughout the centuries. However, for now, we have to live the frustration of not knowing who these people were. Who were these people? What were they like? What did they do? How did Paul know them? Not long after this letter was written and delivered, persecution broke out. Did all these people remain faithful? Did some of them end up dying in the Colosseum or being hung on that cross to burn? 24 of the 35 names mentioned in Romans chapter 16 are women. Paul indicates these women were some of the most faithful and hardest working Christians in the church. That's still true today, isn't it? All these unknown people laughed and cried. They were baptized, and many married and had kids. Many of these unknown people died for their faith. And they were all like us. Remember, as kids, signing your letters with X's and O's, which would mean hugs and kisses. Maybe it's not culturally correct for us to give holy kisses anymore, but we can still give X's and O's, can't we? Someday, the people will sum us up in one sentence. What will that sentence be? May that sentence be, they love.